We start now. Thanks for coming back to the second lecture. I will briefly review the content of the first lecture. So Gaussian processes are a Bayesian model. So in the whole of the talk, we will have an unknown fixed function in black here that we model as a realization of a Gaussian random function, which will be one of the functions in color. And then we observe the unknown function at the black dots, and from these observations, we compute the conditional distribution of the Gaussian process to predict the rest of the function. Okay, so Gaussian processes are characterized by the mean and the covariance function. And the mean function can be any function, but the covariance function needs to satisfy some conditions. And fortunately, there exists a catalog of valid covariance functions. So we have spoken a lot about the exponential, the square exponential, and the Mathern. Okay, so most of the conditioning will be based on the Gaussian conditioning theorem, which states that the conditional distribution of a part of a Gaussian vector given the other part remains a Gaussian vector. And with this, we can condition the Gaussian process given exact observations. So we have predictions, confidence intervals in green, and a conditional distribution in blue. We can do the same with noisy data. And there were some remarks on the computational aspects. Okay, and we were there, and now we'll continue, and now we'll speak a little bit about Gaussian process classification models. So we still have a Gaussian process chi with realization f, which is the function of interest, and we have again observation points x1 to xn. And we have an observation vector capital Yn equal y1 to yn, and this time it's not, it does not take continuous values, it takes binary values. So each value of the observation vector is a 0 or a 1. So two-class classification problem. And the probability that observation y is equal to 1, given the Gaussian process, is an increasing function of the value of the Gaussian process at xi. And this function will be the logistic function. So exponential alpha f of xi divided by 1 plus exponential alpha of xi, alpha f of xi. And alpha, it's like, again, a scaling parameter. If we take alpha large, then these values here, they will be very close to 1 or 0, depending on the sign of f of xi. So if we increase alpha, we have more stringent classification probabilities. And if we take alpha small, the probabilities of 1 will be closer to 1/2. This is a quick illustration of the probabilistic model. We have a latent function f that this time we never observe directly. Instead, we observe blue points where the probability of 1 or 0 depends on f. So when f take large values, there are much more 1s than 0s. And when f takes small values, there are much more 0s than 1s. So the blue points, they give indirect information about the values of f just by counting how many blue points are 1 compared to the number of zeros. And now we want to compute the conditional distribution of quantities of interest given these binary observations. And we'll do things in 2 steps. And the first step will be compute the conditional distribution of the Gaussian vector at the observation point. So Vn, the Gaussian vector chi of x1 to chi of xn, and we want to compute its conditional distribution given the observations. So we assume that the observation vector capital Yn has a realization small yn, and then conditionally to yn equals small yn, the Gaussian vector Vn, it has a density Phi-n, which has an expression for the input V1 to Vn in Rn, and this density takes the form of a normalizing constant, does not depend on V, and that is intractable, times the Gaussian distribution of Vn at V with the mean vector Mn and the covariance matrix R that comes from the mean function and covariance function of the Gaussian process, and then times the likelihood of the binary observations given the values of the random vector Vn. So the product of the probabilities of 1 if yi is a 1 times the probability of 0 if yi is a 0. And the probabilities are given with Vi, where we evaluate this conditional density. Okay, so now we have a conditional density which is non-Gaussian. So before we had Gaussian conditional densities, and now because we have binary observations, we have non-Gaussian conditional densities. So this means that it's hard to work with this density phi n. There are two kinds of methods. There are sampling methods, so based on MC procedures, for instance, where the aim is to obtain samples from the distribution phi n. And then there are approximation methods that, for instance, wants to approximate phi n by a Gaussian distribution. And among the approximation methods, there are, for instance, the Laplace approximation and the EM algorithm. So there is a nice review article on this sampling problem for phi n. Now, step 2, we imagine that we have managed to sample from Vn, and we'll see how it gives information about the conditional distribution we are interested in. So, we have sampled Vn from phi n, then we have a small Vn, a conditional realization of Vn given the observations. Then, conditionally to the observations and this value of the Gaussian vector, the good news is that the chi is still a Gaussian process with the mean function Mn, which is as before. But be careful that Mn depends on the sampled value of Vn and the covariance function Kn, which does not depend on the sampled value of Vn. And then, conditionally again to the same things, chi of x, the value at a new point x, it's Gaussian with mean Mn of x, depends on Vn, and variance Kn of xx. And now we are interested in classifying a new input point. So we have a new observation yx, sorry, this is a 0, so yx is in 0, 1, and probability that yx equal 1 given the latent Gaussian process is again the logistic function applied to f of x. And because we have the conditional distribution of chi at x, we can compute the probability that yx is 1 given the observations and the sampled Gaussian vector. And this probability is expressed as a nice one-dimensional integral of the Gaussian conditional density at V times the probability of having a 1 given V. And in fact, this one-dimensional integral, there exist explicit expressions of it. So, the main idea is that once we have sampled the Gaussian vector Vn, things are again Gaussian and explicit. So things are simpler. And then, from this, we can derive a first Monte Carlo-based algorithm to do a Gaussian process classification. The first step is to obtain n realizations of the Gaussian vector, so Vn1 to Vnn, which will approximately follow the conditional distribution of capital Vn given the observations. So this is the step where there is a potentially costly Monte Carlo procedure. And then, from each realization Vni, we have a conditional mean function Mni, which the mean function changes all the time. And then, in step 2, we average the classifications given by these different mean functions. So the probability that yx is the 1 given the observation is approximately the average of the one-dimensional integrals that we have seen before. So the good thing with this procedure is that there can be convergence guarantees as the Monte Carlo budget n goes to infinity. Okay, so in a sense it's accurate, but also it's potentially computationally costly. And then I did not detail, but we can use also the approximation in, for instance, in the article by Nikisch and Rasmussen, which will typically be faster, but which have less theoretical guarantees. And then one quick illustration of, in the end, what we want to have. We have a data set where each point has an input location, so here a two-dimensional position, and then each point has a sign, for instance, 1 for a circle and 0 for a triangle. And then we can compute the map of conditional probabilities of 1, and we see that it gives a classification of the domain. So in blue, it's the boundary where the probability of 1 is 0.5, and inside the blue area, we classify it as 1. Outside the blue area, we classify as 0. And then, again, the observations are noisy. So for instance, here we have a triangle, which is a 0, but it's classified as a 1. And this is not a problem because we have a 0 here, but the probability of a 1 could still be larger. It's just that we have one random realization of the sign. Okay, so this was just to speak about classification a little bit. The rest of the talk will speak more about regression, so exact observations of Gaussian processes. But now it's good that we have seen a little bit that there are many more use of Gaussian processes than just regression. And now we'll speak a little bit about a different topic, the problem of estimating the covariance function of a Gaussian process. So we have discussed, it has been discussed in this morning lecture that it was important to estimate well the correlation length of a covariance function, for instance. So we will go parametric. So we have a parametric model of covariance functions that are defined by a variance sigma square, which is positive, and a correlation parameter theta, which is in some set of parameters. So for instance, we think as theta being equal to d correlation length if the inputs are vectors in Rd for our Gaussian process chi. So sigma square is the variance parameter, theta is the multidimensional correlation parameter, and c theta is the stationary correlation function, for instance, the isotropic exponential covariance function. And we want to choose our covariance function k of this form in order to compute the conditional distribution of the Gaussian process. So when I will speak about covariance function estimation, for simplicity, I will assume that the mean function is 0, so that the only quantities we need to estimate are sigma square and theta. And we'll, just for the sake of discussion, I will suppose exact observations. So we have the Gaussian observation vector yn, which is composed of exact values of chi, so chi of x1 to chi of xn. And so we want to use these values to compute estimators, sigma hat square of yn and theta hat of yn. And then we want to use what I call the plug-in Gaussian process prediction, meaning that first we estimate the covariance function, and then we fix the covariance parameters to their estimate, and we assume they are fixed, and then we do the second step, which is the conditioning that I have presented before. So just to mention it, there are also other kind of works where they use also a Bayesian prior on the covariance parameters, and in this case, that I will call a full Bayesian model, they do the two steps all together. So it's a larger scale Monte Carlo problem with both the Gaussian process values and the covariance parameters. Okay. So we'll see a first method for estimating the covariance parameters, which is called maximum likelihood, which is the most common method. And the idea is just to write the likelihood of the Gaussian observation vector and then to maximize it. And of course, the likelihood of the observation vector is the Gaussian likelihood, so it's explicit. So we define C theta as the correlation matrix of yn given the correlation function C theta. So the correlation parameter is involved only in the definition of the correlation matrix. And then we maximize the likelihood, which gives us this procedure. The maximum likelihood estimators of sigma square and theta are given by the minimizers of this function, which is the logarithm of the determinant of the covariance matrix plus yn transpose, the inverse of the covariance matrix, times yn. So some remarks. We need to optimize this likelihood numerically, for instance, by gradient descent. And each evaluation of the likelihood, so evaluating this function for fixed theta, it costs a big O of n3 in time per computation because of the determinant and the linear system of equations here. So there exists a trend of work that deals with approximating the likelihood when n is too large. And now for this I mentioned this paper. Okay. The second method of estimation, it was also mentioned in the first lecture this morning, is cross-validation. So we'll use two quantities that I call leave one out quantities. The first one is the conditional expectation of the observation number I given all the other observations. So I leave the observation I out. So it's a prediction of the observation I that is cross-validated and that depends on the correlation parameter theta. This prediction does not depend on the variance sigma square. And then we have sigma square times Cn theta minus I square, which will be the conditional variance of the observation number I given the n minus 1 other observations. And this time it depends on sigma square and theta, and sigma square enters as a factor in the expression here. And from these leave one out predictions, we compute a leave one out score, and here this score will just be the sum of square errors. So sum from I equal 1 to n of the observation number I minus its leave one out prediction square. And this for any theta, it tells us how well we predict the observations when we leave them out of the sample. Then the idea is just to take the parameter theta that gives the smallest sum of square prediction errors. It is what I call the cross-validation estimator of the correlation parameter. So with this, we have estimated theta, and then we need to estimate also sigma square. And to estimate sigma square, we'll study the leave one out conditional variances. So we want that, on average, the square prediction error divided by the conditional variance is equal to 1. So we say a good value for the cross-validation estimator is a value of sigma square such that, on average, the normalized square prediction errors are equal to 1. And this directly gives us an expression of the leave one out estimator of the variance, which will be given by this. So, to estimate theta, we solve an optimization problem. And then we have an explicit expression of sigma square. So, if we are naive here, we may think that we need to compute n times the conditional mean each time with a different data set. And this will be costly because each computation of the conditional mean is in big O of n to the 3. But on the other hand, for each of the data set I, we only change one observation. And so, in fact, we can exploit calculation properties of inverse covariance matrices to virtually compute the n predictions at the same time with the cost of a single matrix inversion. And this is what I call the virtual leave one out formulas. So we call that C theta is the correlation matrix of the observation vector under correlation function C theta. And then we have an explicit expression of the leave one out error number I, chi of xi minus the leave one out prediction. It's equal to the component I of C theta minus 1 times yn divided by the element ii of C theta minus 1. So we only invert one matrix, and with this we can compute the n leave one out errors. It's the same for the conditional variances. Sorry, this is not the good notation. It should be the notation here. So it's the conditional correlation of the observation I. And it's equal to 1 over the element ii of the inverse covariance matrix. So these formulas, they appear in several papers. But to my knowledge, the first papers that give them in full generality, so also when we have an unknown mean function, it's this paper by Dubreuil. And we can combine these expressions with these two expressions and obtain compact matrix vector expressions for the cross-validation. So the cross-validation estimation of the correlation parameter, it's a minimizer of this quadratic form of the observation vector, which uses the inverse correlation matrix. And then the cross-validation estimation of the variance is equal to this quadratic form once the correlation parameter has been estimated. Okay. So it's the same computational cost, big O of n to the 3 for each value of theta here. Okay, so some further references on cross-validation. So I mentioned two papers on methodological aspects of cross-validation for Gaussian processes. And then there is a well-developed topic in asymptotic statistics related to estimating covariance parameters of Gaussian processes. So if we have time, we will speak about it at the very end of the talk. But as two examples of papers in asymptotic statistics that work with cross-validation, we can mention, and maximum likelihood, we can mention these two papers. Okay, so now we can conclude on this introduction to Gaussian processes. So Gaussian processes can be defined on any space X by using an appropriate covariance function. The setting of regression, so direct observations, is a good setting for conditioning because of the Gaussian conditioning theorem. When we have indirect observations, like in Gaussian process classification, then we have more difficult sampling problems and Monte Carlo problems. But still, the fact that we have a Gaussian process, it can still be used to simplify some of the computations. And then, if we want to do a theory on Gaussian processes, it's also good that there exist many results on Gaussian vectors and Gaussian processes. And then, there is a type of work that deals with extending Gaussian processes to obtain non-Gaussian processes which are more flexible. So here we can just mention, for instance, transformed Gaussian processes or deep Gaussian processes. Okay. So now, if there are no questions, I will start to speak about more recent work on sequential learning. So I will review sequential learning with Gaussian processes a little bit. And then I will speak about stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies, which is a type of method to do sequential learning. And I will present a consistency result for these strategies. So, sequential designs. We have a Gaussian process chi with on a compact set X in Rd, so the set is bounded and fixed, and we have a continuous mean function M, a continuous covariance function K. We assume that we know M and K, and the Gaussian process has continuous realizations. And we consider setting of exact direct observations of chi of X, so we can choose points X and observe chi of X with no noise. And then we have seen that once we have observed chi of x1 to chi of xn, the mean and the covariance functions, they become mn and kn. And now they depend on the observations. And of course, we would like to have selected x1 and xn so that mn and kn brings as much information as possible on the values of the Gaussian process. So, what I call maximally informative. So, for instance, we can want that kn of xx, the conditional variance, is small for most of the points x on the domain. Or, if we want to find the maximum of the Gaussian process, like in optimization, we may want instead that the conditional variance is small, especially at the values x for which the conditional mean is large. And the principle of sequential design is to select the observation point I plus 1 after having observed the values chi of x1 to chi of xi. So, in the cases where we can choose the input points where we observe, we want to choose these points one by one, and each time we choose the observation point number I plus 1, we do this as a function of the I first observations. So we will do this, and if we do this, the observation points x1, xn, they will become random, because observation point number I plus 1 depends on the random values of chi of x1 to chi of xi. So when we study sequential designs theoretically, we need to write random observation points, capital X1 to capital Xn. So we'll have some first definitions on sequential designs. So these definitions, they will be used also for the notion of stepwise uncertainty reduction. The first is a more abstract definition of a sequential design. We have a sequence xn of observation points in X will be a non-randomized sequential design where xn is a function of the n first observations and the n first observation points. So formally, we write that xn is fn minus 1 measurable where fi is the sigma algebra spanned by observation point 1 observed value 1 until observation point I observed value I. So we recall the notation capital Fi, which will be used in conditioning notation, which is the information brought by the I first observation point and the I first observed value. And then for the stepwise uncertainty reduction part, we need to use the notion of Gaussian measure. So on R, you have a Gaussian random variable, which is a random variable, and you have the Gaussian distribution, which is the measure of a Gaussian random variable. Then for vectors, you have a Gaussian vector, and you have the Gaussian multidimensional distribution. And similarly, for functions, you have the Gaussian process, which is a random element, and you have the Gaussian measure, which is the distribution of the Gaussian process. So the Gaussian measure, it's a measure on the set of continuous functions on X. That is the law of a Gaussian process with continuous realization functions. So I refer to this book for details and definitions on Gaussian measures. And a Gaussian measure is characterized by a mean function m index nu, where nu is the Gaussian measure, and a covariance function k index nu. So we'll often use this notation, m index nu and k index nu. And then we let gp of m nu, k nu be the Gaussian measure defined by a mean function m and a covariance function k. So a Gaussian measure is a mean function and a covariance function. And now we'll see that when we condition with a sequential design, it goes as what we have seen when the observation points are fixed. And so that we'll use the notation cond that we'll use quite often in this section. So we have new Gaussian measure, so the distribution of a Gaussian process. And then we have n input points x1 to xn and n values, observed values z1 to zn. And then cond x1, z1, xn, zn of nu, it will be the conditional distribution of a Gaussian process with measure nu when we observe value z1 at x1 until value zn at xn. And it's also a Gaussian process, this is what we have seen yesterday, with conditional mean function m that depends on the original distribution nu and on n, I just write n for the n observations, and the conditional function k index nu n. And the expression is as before. M nu n of x is the usual expression of the conditional mean function with the inverse covariance matrix, and kn of xy is the usual expression of the conditional covariance function with the covariance matrix. And then we have this result which is convenient, that says if I take a sequential design of experiments xi, then the conditional distribution of chi given the observation points x1 to xn and the observed values chi of x1 to chi of xn, it's this conditioning cond with x1, xn and chi of x1 to chi of xn. So the idea is that in a sequential design, once we have observed x1, chi of xn, x1, xn, chi of xn, we can you can imagine that x1, xn were actually chosen deterministically at the beginning, that they were non-random, and that only chi of x1, chi of xn are random. And if we imagine this, then we have indeed the usual Gaussian conditioning theorem, and this result tells us that we are right to do this, that for conditioning, it's as if the observation points were deterministic. And this is good because we keep an explicit conditioning. Okay. So, important thing to remember is just this notation cond that will enable us to write conditional distributions of Gaussian processes given observations that come in the index here. Okay, and now we'll speak about stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies. And these strategies will be based on uncertainty functionals. So we have a Gaussian measure nu, which has mean function mu and covariance function k nu, and we'll also let k nu in the rest of the talk be some Gaussian process with a distribution nu. And then an uncertainty functional is just a function of the Gaussian measure. So for any Gaussian measure, for any mean and covariance function, we associate to it an uncertainty, which is a function h, and which is positive. So it measures how uncertain we are of the Gaussian process realization given the mean and the covariance function. So I will give right away some examples of uncertainty functionals. The two first examples are related to optimization. So in these two examples, the objective is to find the maximum of the Gaussian process realization. And we imagine that we have a Gaussian measure nu, which comes typically from conditioning with some observations. And then the question is, how uncertain are we about the location of the maximizer of the Gaussian process? And one measure of uncertainty for this is the following. It's the mean value of the global maximum of the Gaussian process, so max over the whole input set, minus the maximum over the points at which the variance is 0, so typically the observation points, of the mean value. So this is, in expectation, the global maximum minus the current maximum. And if this is very small, it means that our current maximum is close to the global maximum, so we have done a good job at optimization, and the uncertainty is small. A similar uncertainty procedure is what is called the knowledge gradient in the literature. It's the same mean value of the global maximum, this time minus the maximum of the mean function of the Gaussian process. So there are slight differences between the two that we'll see later. And now the two other uncertainty measures, they are based on a different objective. This time, the objective is called failure domain estimation. So we have a threshold t in R, and for any input point x, we want to know if chi of x is smaller than t or larger than t. So for instance, t is a critical value, and chi represents the output of a system, and if chi of x is larger than t, then we are above the critical value, and so we are not safe. So this is an example of motivation to classify the values of chi according to smaller or larger than the threshold t. And then, for an input point u, we will be interested in the probability p nu of u, which will be the probability of being smaller or equal than t. Then the idea is that if p nu of u is close to 0 or 1, then it's good because for u, we are almost sure that either we are above the threshold or below the threshold. Whereas if p nu of u is close to 1/2, then we are very uncertain about if we are above or below the threshold. And so p nu times 1 minus p nu is an uncertainty measure because it's 0 if p is equal to 0 or 1, and it's maximum when p equals 1/2. And actually, it's also the variance of the Bernoulli variable indicator of k nu of u smaller than t. So at any u, we have an uncertainty measure at u related to the threshold. And then we just integrate this uncertainty measure over the domain x. And this gives us an integrated measure of uncertainty related to the conditional distribution U. Then, last example, we are not interested in knowing at every input point if we are above or below the threshold. We are just interested in the measure of the set of input points that are below the threshold. So we are interested in the integral over the input set of the indicator that chi is smaller than the threshold t. So it's interpreted as the probability of failure with the uniform distribution over the input space x. And for this, the uncertainty measure will just be the variance. So if the variance is very small, we are very certain about the value of the probability of failure, also called the variance of excursion volume. Okay, so now we have an uncertainty functional, and actually a stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy. It's a way from any uncertainty functional to compute a sequential design. So now the objective is to choose the observation point I plus 1 according to the previous observation points. And here we'll see how we do this with the stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy. So we'll need one more notation here. So we start with the Gaussian measure nu here, and we imagine that we observe the value of the Gaussian process at an input point x. Then the Gaussian measure nu will become a conditional Gaussian distribution determined by x and by the value chi nu of x. And this new conditional distribution, it will give a new measure of uncertainty h of the conditional distribution. And this new measure of uncertainty, it's random because it depends on the observation value chi nu of x, which is random. And so we take the expectation here. And this gives us a criterion jx of nu, which is called the expected uncertainty after observing chi of x. And a good choice of x is a choice of x so that in expectation this uncertainty will be small. So the sequential design follows the stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy when xi plus 1 is a minimizer over the input domain of this expected uncertainty reduction. And this time, this expected uncertainty reduction, we start with the conditional distribution after I observations, and then we minimize the expected uncertainty when we add the observation of chi of x. And in u0 here, where we start at the very beginning, it is the original distribution of the Gaussian process. So for instance, mu0 is a Gaussian process with mean 0 and with a square exponential covariance function. So of course, mu0 is very uninformative, and then when we condition, the combed distribution becomes more and more informative. So we have a kind of machine that transforms any uncertainty functional h into a strategy for selecting the observation points. So a benefit of this is that you can design an uncertainty functional that you find relevant, and automatically you will have a sequential strategy. Okay, so we have seen 4 examples of uncertainty functionals. We'll see how these 4 examples give 4 strategies, so 4 ways of selecting the point number n plus 1 as a function of the n first points. So we'll use some notation. So En, cov n, Pn will be conditional expectations, covariance, probabilities given the n first observations in Fn. And then, if I take the expected improvement uncertainty functional, and I apply the stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy to it, I obtain what is called the expected improvement criterion for selecting the observation point number n plus 1. And we'll interpret the formula starting here. So we have the max over the input set at the points where the variance is 0. And here, sorry, there is a typo, chi of u is missing. So we have the current maximum, max of the observed values of chi of u. And then we imagine that we observe chi of x at a new point x. Then if chi of x is smaller than the current maximum, we do not improve the optimization, and so we return 0, which is why we take the positive part. If chi of x is larger than the current maximum, then we improve the optimization, and the improvement is chi of x minus the current maximum. This depends on chi of x, and so we take the expectation here. We take the conditional expectation given the n first observations. This gives us the expected improvement based on adding one more observation at x. And then xn plus 1 will be this, that input point x that gives the largest expected improvement. So the kind of greedy optimization procedure where with one single additional point, I want to have the best possible improvement of the current maximum. Then we have the knowledge gradient strategy. So stable uncertainty reduction applies to knowledge gradient uncertainty functional. It selects the observation point n plus 1 as a maximizer of the conditional expectation of the maximum of the new conditional mean given the new value chi of x. So we maximize on average the new maximum of the conditional mean. Then we turn to the estimation of failure domain problem with the two next criteria. First, we have seen the Bernoulli variance uncertainty functional. And this time, it gives a selection criterion which is as follows. xn plus 1, the next observation point, it minimizes over all input points the expectation of the integral of the new Bernoulli variance. So Pn plus 1 x of u is the variance, is the probability that chi of u is smaller than t, given, of course, the n first observations, and given the new value chi of x. And then we minimize, on average, the integral of this p1 minus p with the new conditional probability. So this is indeed the expected uncertainty after one more observation. And then for the variance of excursion volume, we minimize the average, given conditionally to the n first observations, of the variance of the excursion volume, so integral of the indicator function of chi of u smaller than t, conditioned by the n first observations and the new value chi of x. Okay, so some practical comments. For instance, with the two first criteria, we want to optimize the value of chi of x, so we will sample values of chi of x. And here, we will sample only one additional value. So we will sample chi of xn plus 1. And to choose how to sample this value, we need to solve an optimization problem on the input space x. So the motivation for expected improvement is that of maximizing costly functions. So the idea is that maximizing this expected improvement over the input space x, it will be much less costly than evaluating a new value of chi of x. So for instance, evaluating chi of x takes 10 minutes or 1 hour, and we want that maximizing the expected improvement only takes 10 seconds or even less. So the main motivation for this kind of algorithms is that of sequential designs with costly functions. Okay. So there is an optimization problem here to maximize what is called also the acquisition criterion. And then there is a question of computing this En for a certain value of x. And in fact, there is a nice explicit expression of this expected improvement. So it's completely explicit to evaluate. For the knowledge gradient, I think there is an approximation that is used, and then we also have something explicit. For this En, it's more complicated. The authors, they work a little bit with the Gaussian distribution, and they manage to remove this En. So they explicit this conditional expectation, but they still have the integral over the input set. So it's a bit more complicated because we need to minimize an integral over the input space. And here, I think I think also they managed to solve this En, but they have a double integral x with the variance. Okay, so one illustration of how expected improvement work. So here I took a figure from a paper where we want to minimize. So the only difference compared to the rest of the talk is that we want to find the minimum of the function. So we have observed value. We are at step 5, so we have 4 observed values which are given by the white circles. And with the Gaussian process model, we have a conditional mean in black and a conditional variance that gives confidence intervals. And then we can compute the expected improvement ei of x as a function of the input x. And it gives a function like this. So the expected improvement is always 0 for where x is an observation point, because the observations are deterministic. So if I observe again this point, I will never do better than the current maximum. And then the expected improvement is non-zero when x is not an observation point. And the expected improvement, it increases when the conditional mean is small, because we want to minimize. And the expected improvement, it also increases when the conditional variance is large. And here the maximum of the expected improvement is here, and it's here because there is a very large variance. So according to the expected improvement strategy, this x here will be our next observation point. So we add the observation point number 5. So it updates the conditional mean and the conditional variance, and it also updates the expected improvement. And now the expected improvement becomes very small when we are around the new observation point. And this time, the new maximum of the expected improvement is around x equals 0.8, because at the same time, the conditional mean is not very large, and the conditional variance is relatively large. And so the next observation point will be around 0.8, and the algorithm will iterate, for instance, until a budget limit is met. Okay, so there are many practical applications of these algorithms. So we can expected improvement is quite popular for optimization. It's popular for optimal design of industry systems, like in the car industry, for instance. It's also optimized to minimize discrepancies between observed data and parametric models, for instance, with parametric models in chemistry. Then the sequential design related to the failure domain estimation, they are used in reliability studies, for instance, in nuclear engineering. And the knowledge gradient algorithm is used also in optimization problems like in drug discovery. Okay, there are also some other kind of work. So, for instance, some authors work on using the expected improvement to minimize the root mean square error of a neural network according to its architecture. And I would like also to mention that there are other sequential strategies that are not based on the stepwise uncertainty reduction paradigm. And for this, we can mention the Gaussian process upper confidence band, so GPUCB for optimization, which is, for instance, introduced in this paper. So it's a popular algorithm that is used, for instance, in robotic or in bandit problems. Okay, now I will speak a little bit about asymptotic theory, and I will speak about the consistency, so the convergence of these stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies. And basically, I will present the content of a recent paper here. So it's a joint work with Julien Becht from Supélec in France and David Gainsbourger from IDIAP in Switzerland. So we want to obtain some small conditions, mild conditions, that guarantee that the uncertainty after step n will go to 0 almost surely with respect to the distribution of the Gaussian process. So we work under the Gaussian process model. So we want to show that the uncertainty goes to 0. So there exist several results on the asymptotic properties of sequential designs. So we'll review some of them. I mentioned GP-UCB earlier, and in fact there is a nice theoretical analysis of the GP-UCB procedure that provides not only convergence results, but also rates of convergence that would look like the rates of convergence that were presented in the other talks this morning. So rate of convergence depends on the dimension and of the regularity of the Gaussian process. Then there is a paper by Adam Bull which provides rate of convergence for expected improvement. When the function to optimize is when the result is not almost sure, but it is for a fixed function f, which belongs to the reproducing kernel Hilbert space of the covariance function k. Then there already exists a convergence result on the expected improvement, which is given in Vasquez and Becht 2010, where we will generalize it a little bit by allowing for smoother covariance functions and also for degenerate covariance functions. And then there also exist negative results. For instance, there is a paper by Jarodsky that shows that there exist some objective functions and some covariance functions for which expected improvement will be inconsistent. So with our constancy result, we'll show that these negative cases occur with probability 0 under the measure of a Gaussian process. So if I compare our result to this literature, we will have the drawback of just providing convergence results instead of rates of convergence, but we'll have the benefit of working with a general class of strategies and not just specific strategies like GP-UCB or expected improvement. Okay, so we have a first intermediate result which says that the conditional mean and covariance functions converge. So for any way of choosing the observation points xi sequentially, we have that the conditional mean function mn converges almost surely and uniformly to a limit mean function m infinity from x to r. Similarly, the conditional covariance function kn converges almost surely and uniformly to a limit covariance function k infinity. Okay. And to prove these results, we use that the conditional variance is decreasing, and we use martingale arguments for the conditional mean. We also have a limit conditioning result. We let f infinity be the sigma algebra generated by the infinite sequence of observations, and then conditionally to f infinity, chi is still a Gaussian process with mean function m infinity and covariance function k infinity. And then we'll use an ad hoc, so handmade notion of convergence of Gaussian measures that we'll use for our proof. So we consider nu n a sequence of Gaussian measures. And we say that nu n is an almost surely convergent sequence of conditional distributions if we have the two following facts. First, nu n is a Gaussian measure that converges to a limit nu infinity. Converges means that the mean function m nu n converges to a mean function m nu infinity, uniformly and almost surely. And similarly, k nu n converges to a limit function k nu infinity. And then all the Gaussian measures and the limit, they are conditional distributions of the Gaussian process. For any n, finite or infinite, the Gaussian measure nu n is a conditional distribution of the Gaussian process given something. And we have two main motivations for this notion. The first notion is the result that we have seen earlier, that Pn chi, the conditional distribution of the Gaussian process given the n first observations, it converges to P infinity chi, the conditional distribution given the infinite sequence of observations. Then we have another result which is more used to show that the observation points xi are measurable. And this result says that if x infinity is the input space, such that the covariance function at x infinity is non-zero, and if xi is any sequence that converges to x infinity, then the conditional distribution of the Gaussian measure given xi chi of xi, it converges almost surely to the conditional distribution given x infinity chi of x infinity. So this is a bit technical. We don't really need it to understand the main ideas of this talk. Okay. And then one important notion for the convergence will be the super-martingale property. So we say that the uncertainty functional h has the super-martingale property if, for any sequential design x1, x2, etc., the sequence of uncertainty values is a super-martingale with the sigma algebra Fn, with the filtration Fn. Meaning that the conditional expectation of h of Pn plus 1 chi given the n first observations is always smaller than h of Pn chi. So the idea is that on average the uncertainty is reduced when we add one more observation point. And so it's relatively reasonable to assume that on average, if we add one information, we decrease the uncertainty. And in fact, we can show that this super-martingale property, it holds for the 4 examples. And we will prove it for the expected improvement. So it's a short proof, which will enable us to review the notations a little bit. So we have Pn plus 1 chi of x chi is the conditional distribution of chi given the n first observations and given the observation n plus 1 at x. So it's the conditional distribution of Pn chi. Pn chi is the conditional distribution given the n first observations and is conditioned by the additional observation of chi of x at x. Then we look at the uncertainty at step n minus the expectation at expectation conditionally to the n first observations of the uncertainty at step n plus 1 where we add the observation chi of xn plus 1. So I start with h of Pn chi for the expected improvement. So it's the mean value at step n of the global maximum of chi minus the current maximum, which is the maximum for all the points for which the variance at step n is 0, and it's the maximum of the conditional expectation, which is also the observed value. And then minus the expectation here of the expectation of the global maximum given the new observed value chi of xn plus 1, and then minus, so minus minus which gives plus, the expectation of the new current maximum. So max, when the conditional variance given chi of xn plus 1 is 0, of the conditional mean also given chi of xn plus 1. So now we have expressed with these 4 terms the difference between the current uncertainty minus expected new uncertainty. And we want to show that this is positive. And first we will cancel out the first line here. So here we have expectation given n minus expectation of conditional expectation given chi of xn plus 1. So this is an iterated conditional expectation, so it's equal to this one. So these 2 terms cancel. And then I switch the order of the 2 terms here. So I have now plus and minus. And now I observe that the set of u, so that the conditional variance given chi of xn plus 1 is 0, is larger than the set of u such that the conditional variance is 0. This is because when I condition by chi of xn plus 1, I always decrease the conditional variance. So the maximum here, this is a larger set than this one here. So I will decrease the value of this when I take the maximum of the smaller set where only kn of uu is 0. and this one, I leave it unchanged here. And then we observe that if the conditional variance is 0, then the conditional mean is equal to the value of chi of u, because we have exact observations. And same here. So we obtain the current maximum at step n minus the current maximum at step n, which is 0. So we have indeed shown that this quantity is positive. So we have the super-Martingale property for expected improvement. And for the integrated Bernoulli variance, we can make the same type of calculation. It's also quite quick. So we use the notation Pn plus 1 x z of u as the conditional expectation of the indicator that Ku is smaller than t, conditioned always by the n first observations, and also conditioned by chi of x equals z. And now we look at the expected uncertainty after the new value chi of xn plus 1. So En of h of the new conditional distribution. The new uncertainty is the integral over the input domain x of the new probability of being below the threshold times 1 minus this new probability. So we have p1 minus p, which is the variance of the indicator function. So it's equal to the variance of 1 of Ku smaller than t given the new observation chi of xn plus 1, and as always given the n first observations. And we exchange the integral over x and the mean value En. And then we use the law of total variance. So here we have the expectation of the conditional variance. It's smaller than the variance of the indicator function. And now we have the integral of the variance, which is the uncertainty measure at step n. So again, the expected uncertainty at step n plus 1 is smaller than the current uncertainty. So we have the super-Martingale property. And now we can state the main convergence result. So we need one last notation. So G of nu is the maximum over the input space of the current uncertainty at a measure nu minus the mean value of the new uncertainty if we add the observation K nu of x. So G of nu, it's a characterization, it's a function of Gaussian measure nu, which is the maximum of the expected uncertainty reduction we can obtain when we add one more observation point. Then we have our first main theorem. We take h an uncertainty functional with the super-Martingale property. And we take xn design of experiment, so sequential design that follows the stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy. So recall that xn plus 1 minimizes the mean value of the uncertainty after observation of chi of x. Mean value with respect to the Gaussian measure after the n first points. And then first result is that automatically the maximum expected uncertainty reduction will go to 0 almost surely. Then if we have some additional technical conditions, so the 3 following ones. So first, the uncertainty of the Gaussian measure p and chi goes to uncertainty of p infinity chi almost surely. Second, we have the same for the maximum expected uncertainty reduction. And then last condition, which is quite important, that says for any Gaussian measure such that the maximum expected uncertainty reduction is 0, then the uncertainty is 0. So if we have these three conditions, then we have the result we wanted, that the uncertainty at step n goes to 0 almost surely when n goes to infinity. And an important condition is the number 3, because on special cases, usually you can check assumptions 1 and 2. It's technical, but it can be checked. But assumption 3, it can require more work. And the interpretation is that if we have no possible uncertainty reduction with one more observation, then we have no uncertainty. And this is important Because if the assumption 3 does not hold, then you can have a Gaussian measure obtained by some conditioning, by some observations, such that for any new x, the expected uncertainty reduction is 0. And then, in this case, the stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy is not defined because any x will give 0 uncertainty reduction. And if we are in these cases, we want that actually the uncertainty is 0, so that there is no need to add new observations. So I briefly summarize additional results in the paper. So we prove that the general results apply to the 4 examples that we have discussed. We also introduce the notion of regular loss function, where the uncertainty functional h is an average loss when we estimate a quantity interest on the Gaussian process realization. So quantity of interest is, for instance, the position of the maximum of chi or the set of u such that we are below the threshold. So it's a special type of uncertainty functional h. And with this loss function, we have another generic convergence result which requires fewer assumptions to be checked. I will conclude briefly on this second section. So, in fact, we have exploited the probabilistic framework given by Gaussian processes to define uncertainties and expected uncertainties, and so to define uncertainty reduction strategies. Then we have proved the convergence of these strategies. And our proof, it's a convergence result, but it works in many cases. For instance, it can work with very smooth covariance functions, where there were inconsistency cases shown for small special functions. And depending on the type of uncertainty, we don't need to prove that the conditional variance goes uniformly to 0, or we don't need to prove that the sequence of observation points xi is dense. Then to me, there are two main types of questions on the theory of sequential designs. First, I think there are not so many theoretical results when the covariance function is estimated, for instance, by frequentist or Bayesian procedures. And for instance, for the sequential designs based on estimation of failure domain, there are no rate of convergence results, to my knowledge. So it will be good to show these rates of convergence results. So before I start with the last topic, maybe there are some questions on sequential designs. Yeah. They still hold. In fact, the paper is written with Gaussian noise. The paper that I mentioned, where there are these results, it's written in the framework where we observe chi of x plus the noise epsilon. So, you're right, except for the expected improvement. So in fact, as the expected improvement is written, it uses the notion of current maximum. So here there is the mistake, but yeah, it's based on the notion of maximizing over the points where the variance is 0, and for this you need the exact observations. So the expected improvement is designed for exact observations. It can be adapted to noisy observations by plugging something in the current maximum, meaning estimating the current maximum. But we did not study theoretically extensions of the expected improvement to the case of noisy observations. But for the 3 other criteria, so knowledge gradient and estimation of failure domain, they are defined with noisy observations, and we have the convergence also with noisy observations. Yeah.
We should refeed our process model each step. It sounds like
Each step, which step?
When we estimate the U point.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, typically first you store the inverse covariance matrix only once independently of U. And then for each new U, you have a cost in O of n squared if you do everything exactly to compute the conditional variance with the quadratic form. So indeed, for all U, when you want to evaluate this, you have a cost in big O of n squared. Other questions? Yeah, it's a good question. So there are two types of questions. The first one is you still want to have a new observation n plus 1 and then n plus 2, and you will still choose xn plus 2 knowing chi of xn plus 1, but still you want to use in your, for instance, expected improvement the fact that you will have two observations, and there exists some works on this. I think it's called two-step ahead expected improvement. And the idea is that it becomes very complicated to have a nice expected improvement. For instance, I think it's related to, I forgot the name, recursive programming or something. You want to maximize over xn plus 1 the maximum over xn plus 2 of your expected improvement when you have observed chi of xn plus 1 and you choose chi of xn plus 2. So more or less you maximize a maximum. And so I don't know very much the details of this, but with two steps it's feasible, but with more it becomes very complicated. But still there exist some references on this. So after the talk I can try to find them for you if you want. Then there is a second type of question, which is simpler in a sense, is the question of parallel computing. The idea is that we can launch several observations of chi at the same time. For instance, we roll parallel evaluations of the function f. In this case, we choose several points at a time. For instance, we choose 3 new points. And in this case, there also exist extensions of the expected improvement called multi-step expected improvement, where, for instance, you maximize the max of chi of x1, chi of x2, chi of x3 for 3 new points, minus the current maximum. But then, in practice, it's very good because you exploit parallel computations, but it's more difficult to compute this multi-step expected improvement. So you need some approximations or some heavy Monte Carlo computations. So other questions? Okay, so with the remaining time, we will start to study Gaussian processes with constraints. So we will not go until the end of this section, unfortunately, but we'll have some ideas. So now, this work is mainly based on the PhD thesis of Andrés Felipe López Lopera. So I'm a co-supervisor, and Andrés will defend in September 19 in Saint-Étienne in France. And his thesis was about Gaussian processes with inequality constraints. So we consider a Gaussian process X on 0, 1 to the d, so the hypercube for simplicity. Again, for simplicity, we will consider a mean function 0, And now we assume that we have additional information about the Gaussian process. So we'll study 3 types of information. First case, we know that chi of x is larger than L and smaller than u for any x. This is what I call boundedness constraints. Second case, we know that chi of x is an increasing function of all its variables. So for each I, the derivative number I of chi of x is larger or equal than 0. This is what I call monotonicity constraint. And other type of constraint, we know that chi is a convex function on 0, 1 to the d. Then we can modify these constraints. We can also combine them. For instance, bounded and monotonic Gaussian process. So there are practical motivations for this. There are many motivations in computer experiments. For instance, you can have computer models for which one input is the input energy of the system. And you know that if you put more energy in the system, you will have more output energy. So in this case, we know that the output energy is an increasing function of the input energy, and we want that our Gaussian process model obeys these constraints. Other standard cases are when we know that the output is, for instance, in 0, 1. For instance, the output is a concentration in chemistry or an energetic efficiency. Okay, so these are 2 examples in computer experiments. There also exist examples of constraints for other kind of data than computer experiments. For example, Andres has worked on Gaussian processes driving point processes, and here the constraint is that the Gaussian process is positive because it gives the intensity of a point process. Okay, so these constraints will have an impact on several things. So in general, we write these constraints as Gaussian process chi belongs to a function space epsilon. For instance, epsilon is a set of bounded functions. And now, okay, so very important, we will always be in the case where the probability that the Gaussian process belongs to the function space is strictly positive. And in fact, this will happen very often. So for many reasonable Gaussian processes and many reasonable function spaces epsilon, we will have strictly positive probabilities of the constraints. And this, the fact that the probability of the constraint is strictly positive, it will enable us to condition by the constraints. So now we have a new stochastic model. Our observation process, it's not a Gaussian process anymore. The distribution of chi is the distribution of a Gaussian process conditioned to belong to some function space. So we are not in the, strictly speaking, in the Gaussian case anymore. We are in the generalized Gaussian case. So we will have a new conditional distribution. Now, if we have exact observations, we want the conditional distribution of chi given as before, chi of x1 equals y1, chi of xn equals yn, but also given chi belongs to the function space epsilon. And we'll see also that we can have new estimation procedures for the covariance parameters theta that takes the constraints into account. So, one quick motivation for the constraint. We have a true function in red, which is CDF, so which is increasing and bounded between 0 and 1. And we apply the first Gaussian process model without constraint and with a mean 0. So the conditional mean, it can decrease, which does not satisfy the constraint. And yeah, so here the main problem is that the conditional mean decreases. And then also the uncertainty is large because on the left, we do not exclude the fact that the true function increases and then decreases again. And then if we apply the Gaussian process with the same covariance parameters, but with the 2 boundedness and monotonicity constraints, we obtain something more accurate. We have a conditional mean which is increasing, and we have small uncertainties because we know that, for instance, between these 2 points, we know that the function stays between the 2 points and increases. So it's much more constrained than before. So this is a quick motivation that with the same data set, with also the constraint information, we can improve the predictions of the Gaussian process. So we'll review some existing work on constrained Gaussian processes. So when we have boundedness constraints, so constraints of the form chi belong to Lu, we can just transform the Gaussian process. So we can model our observation yi by t of chi of xi, where t is bijective from R to Lu. And then basically we use the inverse function of t, and we go back to the standard Gaussian process case. So computationally, the framework of the transformation is very beneficial, but it only works for boundedness constraints. When we have monotonicity constraints, we cannot use just the transformation, and then this approach of conditioning by the constraints, it has become standard. But the problem is that the functional constraints, so chi belongs to a function space, needs to be approximated by constraints on vectors to work on the computer. And then there are two kinds of works. The first type of work is to approximate the functional constraint by a fixed number of constraints on inducing points, so in these two papers. And then the kind of work that we'll do is to approximate the Gaussian process chi by a finite dimensional Gaussian process chi-m that looks like a functional decomposition. And then we can work with constraints on chi-m in function spaces. And our work, it follows from this work by Matuk and Bay, which introduced this finite dimensional approximation. So I review the finite dimensional approximation in dimension 1. So basically, we model the Gaussian process chi-m of t as a sum of triangle basis functions. So chi-m of t is sum from 1 to m of some Gaussian coefficients Eg, and actually Eg is chi of tg time a basis function number j, and the basis function number j, it's a triangle with a center at tj, and which is 0 at the next point tj plus 1. Okay. So, in fact, if the continued Gaussian process is in red, the finite dimensional approximation is just piecewise affine interpolation at the nodes t1 to tm. Okay. Then there is a strong computational benefit of this. The benefit is that if chi-m is between L and U everywhere, so functionally, if and only if the m coefficients are between L and U. So we have an equivalence between a constraint on functions and a constraint of vectors, which is what we want. And similarly, chi-m is a non-decreasing function if and only if the Gaussian values E1 to EM are increasing, and chi-m is a convex function if and only if the finite increments are increasing. So on the right, we have a finite number of inequalities, and we can work with them, and we will be guaranteed to satisfy the constraints everywhere on the input space. Then we can extend this to dimension 2 by tensorization. So chi-m of t1, t2 will be a double sum of products of triangular basis functions. So this is good in dimension 2. It becomes very problematic in higher dimensions. And so we are working on some other approaches in high dimension that I will not have time to mention today. So just a few slides on the general sampling problem. So we again have the one-dimensional approximation chi-m, and we want to study general linear constraints of the form matrix lambda times the vector of coefficients E is between L and U, where lambda is a fixed Q times N matrix, so we have Q constraints. So this enables to write the three types of constraints and also their combinations. And then we observe the value yn of chi of x1 to chi of xn, and then we have the sampling problem, distribution of lambda E given phi e equal yn, where phi is the matrix that gives the observed values from the values of the node, and given lambda e between L and U. So now, I think in 1 or 2 minutes, I will try to go very quickly through the rest of the section, just to mention what is there, and then you will have the slides if you are interested. So, we have a sampling problem, which is to sample a Gaussian vector with some non-distribution conditionally to being between two vectors of bounds. So we can address this problem with various MCMC methods, and we are interested in the mode, so the point with largest density, the conditional mean, and the conditional sample. And with this, we have different things. We have in blue, we have in blue circles we have some observation points. In blue, we have the standard Gaussian process regression, which is not always increasing. In red, we have the constraint conditional mean, which comes from Monte Carlo, which is increasing. We have in gray conditional realizations. And in black triangles, we have the mode, so the most probable function under the constraints. So we see an improvement of the prediction because of the constraints, with an additional computational cost. Okay, so we tested several Gaussian, constraint Gaussian Monte Carlo algorithms. So Hastings Metropolis, Gibbs sampling, minimax tilting, and Hamiltonian Monte Carlo. And for now, we like Hamiltonian Monte Carlo. Okay, so there's this first paper with more details. Then we have some options for high dimensions. Okay, and then we studied also the constraint maximum likelihood estimator. So our estimation procedure for the parameter theta maximizes the probability of the observations conditional to the constraint. Sorry, so it's here. Maximize the constraint log likelihood, which is the unconstrained log likelihood, minus the probability of the constraint, plus the probability of the constraints given the observations. So again, the constraint log likelihood is not explicit, and we need some Monte Carlo procedures to approximate it. And then, in the first paper I mentioned, we have some consistency results on the constrained maximum likelihood estimator, and in another paper, we have asymptotic normality results on also the constrained maximum likelihood estimator. So a quick conclusion on constrained Gaussian processes. So inequality constraints, they correspond to additional information. For instance, knowledge on the physical system that is modeled. Taking them into account, they enable to improve the predictions with a computational cost, meaning that we go from explicit Gaussian conditioning to Monte Carlo procedures. We have the constrained maximum likelihood estimator, which has similar consistency guarantees as maximum likelihood. And asymptotically, in fact, the constrained and unconstrained maximum likelihood estimators, they have the same asymptotic distribution. But in experiments, we have seen that for small sample size, constrained maximum likelihood is beneficial. Then our main ongoing work is the finite dimensional approach in high dimension. Okay, so in the slides you will have the references that are mentioned. And now I thank you for being present for the two lectures. Thank you.